"Move your car, Caleb, or I'll run it over too." That's what Lydia Rollins screamed from the top of a rented bulldozer, her voice cutting through the morning quiet like a buzzsaw, engine roaring, blade already chewing straight through my father's stonework. You'd think I'd dive in front of her or throw a fit, but all I could do was stand there, fists clenched, neighbors frozen behind. Half-drawn blinds, as chunks of 2 decades of sweat and care went flying, just debris to her. Yeah, that really happened. That's how it all started. She claimed she'd warned me, said I'd been fined, ignored the letters, made her look bad in front of her board. Terrain modifications must meet uniform grade. She barked when the dozer finally groaned to a halt, and she stomped down. Pastel blazer streaked with clay, hair wild. My voice barely made it out. "You just destroyed my property." She smirked and said, "I just restored community standards. Now you'll pay for restoration and removal." She actually believed it. And so did most folks on this street, at least until the ground decided to fight back. Let me back up a sec. I'm Caleb Mercer. I'm a civil engineer. And this yard was my father's life's work. Each stone, each curve, laid to save this slope from washing away in the winter storms, all by hand, all with care. Lydia? She saw it as an insult. After Dad died, she came after me with the same fake authority she'd always waved at him. Letters, fines, threats, and then, when that didn't get her the control she craved, a bulldozer. I watched her go, dust rising in the wake of the treads, neighbors silent, some recording, most just grateful it wasn't their turn. My father's notebook was still in the shed, pages yellowed. Sketches of terraces and drainage. I spent that night studying every angle, every line, listening to the ghost of my father saying, "Find the balance, and let the earth do the rest." By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to shout, wasn't going to sue. I was going to rebuild, exactly to code, to the letter, while laying a lawful trap right beneath her nose. Lydia wasted no time. Her community pride email went out by dawn, her grinning beside the same machine that had wrecked my home, telling everyone sometimes leadership means direct action. She had no idea what she'd started. When I began repairs, neighbors peeked, whispered, watched as I documented every inch. Photos, measurements, not out of anger, but evidence. That's when Dennis, the HOA contractor, showed up, hands wringing his cap, eyes darting. He admitted Lydia had forced him to demonstrate enforcement, threatened his job, faked a board vote. He was scared, but he told the truth, and I told him to keep his head down. He'd done nothing wrong. The damage was all hers. Rebuilding the terrace, I added something new, an adaptive grid system beneath the stones. All legal, all by the book. But if anyone rolled a bulldozer or truck over it, the ground would flex, give way just enough to trap heavy wheels, not harm anybody, just embarrass the hell out of whoever thought they could. Bulldoze their way to compliance. I called it adaptive drainage testing. Lydia would call it poetic justice. Sure enough, Lydia couldn't leave it alone. She showed up 3 days later, clipboard in hand, with a newer, bigger bulldozer, her niche trailing behind like a reality show assistant. She tried the same routine, barking about violations, accusing me of failing to submit reports. Never mind that I'd filed everything, certified. I quoted the code. She rolled her eyes, told her operator to start grading. Dennis was there, too, watching helplessly from across the street. "That soil's not ready for heavy," he warned. She ignored him. "You ever see karma in real time?" The dozer rolled forward, tracks barely crossing the new stonework before the ground groaned. Just a soft sigh, and suddenly the left side dipped, sinking into the trench I'd engineered. The operator panicked. Lydia screamed. The engine stalled, steam hissing. The bulldozer didn't crash. It just sat there, stuck and humiliated, blade deep in the dirt, every camera on the block rolling. I held up my phone and said, "There's your compliance test." Lydia lost it. "You planned this," she hissed. "You'll pay for this." I just shrugged. "Every inch is to code, Lydia. That's what you wanted." She stormed off, Dennis shaking his head, neighbors creeping out to take photos. By sunset, the video was online, Lydia's bulldozer half sunk in my yard, her shouting into her phone, a meme before morning. Cedar Hollow's group chat exploded. For once, most folks weren't on her side. But she wasn't done. She sent me a formal notice accusing me of malicious construction, threatened fines under a regulation she made up. Didn't matter. The city was already involved. Turns out someone sent the video to the county, and within a day, state inspectors rolled up, clipboards, drills, the whole 9 yards. They verified every inch of my work, checked the soil, reviewed my permits. Impressive work, the inspector said. Lydia tried to argue, but then Dennis showed up with proof, original inspection reports, invoices, even emails where she'd told the board to. Fake compliance forms. Suddenly, it wasn't just a property dispute. It was fraud. Within a week, Lydia's world caved in faster than her rented bulldozer. The HOA board split. Her lawyer quit. The state taped violation notices to her door, and neighbors who'd lived in fear for years started waving again, talking again. Dennis quit, too, and handed over a flash drive with every doctored document, every fake fine she'd issued, every sketchy payment. The evidence went straight to the state. I wish I could say Lydia backed down gracefully. She tried everything, blamed me, blamed. Dennis called emergency meetings, shouted in front of the news cameras about protecting your investments. Nobody was buying it anymore. Not after Mrs. Langley, whose late husband planted the roses. Lydia, once fined, stood up in court and told the truth. You made us ashamed of our own yards. That broke the room. When the judge ruled against Lydia, ordered restitution, barred her from HOA business, threatened criminal charges, it felt like the ground itself had finally settled. But the real win wasn't seeing her lose. It was watching this neighborhood come back to life. Fences dropped, shutters painted pink, kids playing where they used to sneak. The old HOA office became a community workshop. No more clipboards, no more threats. I became interim president by accident. Didn't want the job, but couldn't say no to folks who'd just learned how to stand up for themselves. Order doesn't come from control, I told them. It comes from respect. If you're wondering. About Lydia, she tried one last speech on the courthouse steps, blaming everyone but herself, but this time nobody listened. The same neighbors she once ruled closed in, demanding answers. Refusing to be scared. Dennis stood beside me, lighter than I'd ever seen him. You think she'll come back? He asked. I shook my head. Not if she knows what's good for her. The ground remembers. So here I am, standing in the yard my father built, under a sky that finally feels open again, listening to laughter drift up from the street. The old stones shine, the new grid holding steady. Beneath. We're not perfect, but we're free. And you know what? That's enough. If you've ever tangled with an HOA bully, tell your story below. Let's see whose ground stands firmest. Justice takes time, but when it hits, man, does it echo. A couple of weeks after that last courthouse scene, Cedar Hollow barely looked like the same neighborhood. Something in the air had shifted, lighter, easier. Like the place could finally breathe for the first time in years. You know that feeling after a long storm, when sunlight spills through the clouds and everything smells clean and sharp. That's what it was like every morning for the first time in forever. People you never used to see outside suddenly showed up at each other's doorsteps with coffee or bread or stories about what the HOA had fined them for last spring. Mrs. Langley painted her shutters the wildest shade of pink you've ever seen. Claimed it was in honor of her late husband, who always said the neighborhood could use a little color. No one dared to argue. If anything, folks started competing to outdo each other. Painted mailboxes, homemade swings, garden gnomes popping up like mushrooms after rain. The old HOA office, once Lydia's fortress, turned into a community workshop. The place that used to pump out violation letters and threats now buzzed with the sound of drills and laughter and kids racing through the halls. Dennis, free from the leash, helped fix up the place. No more clipboards, no more fines, he'd say, grinning, sweat on his brow. Just neighbors, finally. I got used to folks calling me Mr. President as a joke. Couldn't help but laugh every time. Because honestly, the job was more janitor than anything else. We rewrote the HOA charter from scratch. Every meeting was open, every ledger published online. Every decision put to a vote right there in the community center, usually over chili or lemonade, sometimes with somebody's kid strumming a guitar in the corner. The old rules, the old fear, it all got replaced by this kind of stubborn, awkward hope. Like people learning how to trust their own voices again. Lydia, meanwhile, faded into the background. Her name still came up in whispers, sometimes anger, sometimes disbelief, sometimes just pity. She fought the charges, of course, hired new lawyers, blamed everyone from Dennis to me to the weather, but the evidence was just too solid. The state nailed her for fraud, misusing community funds, unauthorized excavation, you name it. The restitution checks took months. But eventually, every neighbor got a letter in the mail. Refund enclosed, apology not included. Funny thing, though, when it was finally over, nobody celebrated. There was no parade, no victory party. Just this slow, steady rebuilding. People planting roses, repainting doors, pulling weeds from yards that had gone wild under Lydia's rule. Even Dennis, who'd carried so much guilt for so long, seemed lighter, like he could finally stand up straight. We started calling the whole mess the Bulldozer redemption. Someone online even made a meme out of it, and for a week or two the story trended. HOA tyrant gets sunk by her own arrogance. But here's the part nobody tells you about. When the battle's done, when the villain's gone, you don't just snap your fingers and feel okay again. Sometimes the scars run deep. I spent a lot of nights on my porch, staring at the rebuilt terraces, tracing my father's old designs with my eyes, wondering what he would have thought about how it all ended. I like to think he'd have been proud, not because I won, but because the ground was steady again. Because neighbors were finally talking, finally living, not just surviving. And then, just as things felt like they might actually settle, I got a letter. The county wanted to recognize my work, community resilience, they called it. Mrs. Langley brought over homemade bread, told me the board had nominated me for some civic award. Dennis laughed, said I should hang it next to my dad's plaque, balance restored. I told him awards never kept the rain off your roof or the dirt from shifting under your feet, but the truth is, it felt good. It felt like closure. But nothing's ever that simple, right? Even after Lydia left, even after the fines and the meetings and the lawsuits, Cedar Hollow wasn't perfect. There were arguments about fences, about dogs, about whose kid knocked over whose mailbox. But the fights felt different now. Honest, out in the open. The fear was gone. One night, just as the sun was dropping behind the ridge, I saw Dennis standing at the old community garden, hose in hand, whistling off-key. He looked over, waved me down. "Think the ground remembers?" he asked, nodding at the stones. I shrugged. "Always. You mess with it long enough, it'll remind you who's boss." He grinned. Guess we all got reminded. Sometimes I think about Lydia, where she went, if she ever thinks about the mess she left behind, if she regrets anything. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. Doesn't really matter anymore. The ground doesn't hold grudges. It just settles, finds its level, waits for the next fool who thinks they can bend it to their will. So that's my story, at least for now. I never set out to lead a rebellion, never planned on making enemies, never thought a rented bulldozer would change the whole future of a neighborhood. But sometimes all it takes is standing your ground, literally and figuratively, and a whole community finds its courage. Tell me, have you ever stood up to someone who thought they were untouchable? Did the ground ever shift in your favor, or did you have to find a way to fix it yourself? Drop your story in the comments. Share where you're watching from. And if you're living through your own version of Cedar Hollow, just remember, justice doesn't always roar in with sirens. Sometimes, it's as quiet and steady as the earth beneath your feet. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this, and don't forget, around here, the ground always remembers.